Through hiking any of the long trails of the world is an amazing experience, and it puts the human body to a mind-boggling test. My name is Happy Hour, and I'm an exercise and nutritional physiologist. In part 1 of this video series, I told you about the surprising effects of hiking 2,500 miles on my body. In this video, I'll share with you what I think is the physiologic explanation for those bizarre effects. At the center of this is what I like to think of as a perfect storm of energy flow through the body. Something we often refer to as bioenergetics, the energy flow in and out of the body and exchanging within different compartments of the body. I think through hiking creates a perfect storm. Not in everybody. It did in me, and it probably does in many others. But it's something that I think is an intriguing story, and it's probably a high prevalence of this on the trail. So what is that storm? Two big components. One is that we have an enormously high energy expenditure. Walking all day, every day for many weeks, many months in a row creates a demand for energy, for calories. At the same time as we have this huge demand to burn calories and use them for getting us up the trail, we have a limited availability of calories to our body. How do calories come into the body? They come in the form of food. So as you know, through hiking, you're out in the wilderness. There's not many concession stands along the trail, other than maybe a really nice bunch of huckleberry bushes, which can be a dream, honestly. But seriously, you don't have access to food along the trail. So what do? You get to a road crossing, you put your thumb up, you hitchhike to town, you eat as much as you can, you load up your backpack, but it's probably not as much food as you would eat along the trail when you're out in the wilderness if you had an infinite supply of food at all times. So you have this combination of high energy expenditure, limited energy intake, and this creates an energy deficit, a mismatch. And I can tell you my numbers. But first, real brief. Energy expenditure was measured by correlating heart rates on the trail to energy expenditure measured in the laboratory. Energy intake was measured using video documentation of food intake with subsequent nutrient analysis using USDA databases. Total energy expenditure, 5,700 calories per day. That's enormous if you're used to seeing total energy expenditure numbers from kind of living in our modern society, where you typically see people with high total energy expenditures, maybe in the 3,000s. Energy intake was 4,100 calories per day. So we have a 1,600 calorie mismatch between energy expenditure and energy intake. So how do we account for that? Well, some of you might already know off the top of your head. It's like, well, you lost body fat, Happy Hour. Each pound of that body fat that you lost was converted into energy. And that's true. So I'll account for that. And I also have to account for the 10-pound increase in lean mass. Factoring in both of those changes in tissue, the energy that was liberated from fat as I lost fat, and the energy that got stored away in lean mass as I built more lean mass, accounts for almost 700 calories. So that still leaves nearly 900 calories that are unexplained. In bioenergetics, it's a zero-sum game. We can't leave something unaccounted for. We may put that on paper and say, well, there's something else going on, but the body has to close that difference somehow. There's something else that has to explain the rest. And what is that? I think that's where this story gets really interesting. So your body can't add energy in. We already know the food intake, and we know how much is being taken out of storage. There's no other way to get energy. I mean, you can have infusions, but I didn't have any of those. So we take a look at the energy expenditure side. Is there any way that the body could really have reduced the energy expenditure? So I said it was 5,700 calories per day. That's measured when the body is in its healthy state before things start to shift. But is there another explanation? Maybe the true total energy expenditure came down. Well, one thought would be walk less, but I didn't walk less. I walked the same amount. I just kept going. The body can start shopping around. It's like, okay, what else can we shut off that costs us energy? And when you hear about resting metabolic rate or basal metabolic rate, that's the energy cost to maintain the body in its sort of normal, healthy state. Some of the things that the body's burning calories on aren't critical for staying alive in the short term. Long term, they're probably all important, or at least for the species that we maintain these. But in the short term, your body can shut off some of these, or at least slow some of these processes down that are just normal energy consuming processes. And I'll give you one example. Many of you may have heard of a phenomenon called amenorrhea. It's when women stop having their periods. They stop having their menstrual cycles. And what this is a reflection of is they're shutting off their reproductive function. Just maintaining the capacity to reproduce costs the body energy. And this is true in women. It's also true in men. It just happens to be in women, it's easier to see that overt symptom of amenorrhea, cessation of menstrual cycles. In men, if we measure sperm levels or sperm production, or if we measure sex hormone levels like testosterone, we see that those can drop just like women stop having periods. And by the way, when women stop having periods, they also have drops in sex hormones as well, like estrogen. I didn't measure testosterone levels, I didn't measure sperm levels, but it's very possible that my body slowed those processes down. And this would suggest that maybe I wasn't burning 5,700 calories per day, but maybe it was a little bit less. What else does the body do? Well, there's a lot of things that the body does that are not necessary for short-term survival. And another one is maintaining tissues. We call it tissue remodeling. Tissues are always kind of being damaged at a low rate, and the body's always remodeling them, rebuilding them so they don't deteriorate. Well, some tissues we can, you think, okay, what about muscle? Can you just shut off maintenance of that? Well, the body's going to think, hey, this guy is walking like crazy. We can't quit maintaining muscle. He's doing that voluntarily. The body, sort of in its automatic functions, can't shut off what I do voluntarily. So if I keep walking, the body's going to prioritize maintaining muscle tissue. And this makes sense, evolutionary speaking, because your body wouldn't want to shut off muscle function, even when you're low on food intake, because historically our survival depended on our ability to run or to defend ourselves from predators and so on. So it sounds odd, but our capacity to exercise is really important historically in our evolution for survival. So we don't shut off that sort of thing. But what other things could we shut off? Bone. And bone is a very slow, sort of metabolically slow tissue. But it costs energy to maintain bone. And bone is always being disassembled and reassembled on a microscopic level to heal up little microscopic fractures that you'll never hear of in a clinical setting. They're way below the radar. And you can shut off maintenance of bone for a while without dying. And so that is what I propose happened to my bone. It's like, okay, I was in an energy mismatch, intake versus expenditure. Stored energy mobilization didn't account for it all. My body had to shut off things. I may have had a reduction in sperm production and testosterone levels. Wish I'd have had those measures, and even things like growth hormone. But I did have a measurement of bone, and bone went down, and that's perfectly consistent with this phenomenon. So other tissues may have been doing this as well. I just don't have any evidence for those. I think that may be a reasonable explanation for the bone. I would have loved to have had the sort of the hormones that are involved in regulating bone health and bone remodeling, but I don't. So then the other piece to really question is, how is it that your cholesterol levels went sky high? And if I add this into the idea I have about why all this looks weird and all of a sudden it's not so weird, there's this overarching sort of explanation. I mentioned sex hormone levels. Sex hormones are, and steroid hormones in general that we have in our body makes these, they're all manufactured from, guess what? Cholesterol. If you look up the biochemical structure of these things online and you look at the structure of cholesterol, it's like, wow, they look really similar. So our body makes sex hormones and steroid hormones from cholesterol. And so what happens is our body is shutting off sex hormone production and steroid hormone production, is in particular anabolic hormones that are building tissue, creating things, remodeling bone. We want to shut that off as much as possible, because when we're short on energy, we don't want to put a bunch of energy into remodeling and restructuring our body. So our body's pretty smart in that way. It slows down sex hormone production, and that slows down all this energy costs associated with remodeling and maintaining tissues that you can sort of forego maintenance of for a little while. It's like in your house. You don't have to remodel it every day, but over time it will deteriorate. And so hopefully you can get things back together before it goes too far. Anyway, so a reduction in sex hormone production means we need less of the thing that we use to make sex hormones in our body, i.e. cholesterol. And if we don't use the cholesterol, then it accumulates in the body. And that, I propose, is an explanation for the increase in cholesterol that I saw. Triglycerides is a little harder to explain, but triglycerides can be used to manufacture cholesterol by our bodies. So if that manufacturing of cholesterol in the body was starting to slow because we've accumulated all this cholesterol, that would explain the accumulation of triglycerides. So that's the short, concise story to what I have here. I would love to have more pieces to fit into this puzzle, but I think the important thing here is that you see there's a phenomenon that I have a few isolated pieces that, when explained in the context of this mismatch between energy intake and mobilization of stored energy versus energy expenditure, that this all really kind of adds up to be a neat story. So what does all this mean? If you're aspiring to be a thru-hiker, or you are a thru-hiker, you'll have to tune in next time to find out.